Now, in the wake of a show like Andor, what is Star Wars seems to be a rather popular question these days. Or maybe the question or questions are more, what actually makes something Star Wars, or not? What are the secret ingredients, what needs to be included or excluded to make something feel like it belongs in this franchise so many of us know and love? Or is it something else entirely, some other type of qualification that truly makes something Star Wars? And I think to begin to answer this question, we need to go back to the very beginning. We need to go back to May of 1977, when the first Star Wars movie came out and quite simply took the world and box office by storm. There had never been anything quite like it before. People who watched it were blown away and amazed by the visuals, roused by the incredible score, and captivated by this other galaxy they'd been introduced to, filled with characters that felt real and relatable. Oftentimes, people who just seen it would walk out of the theater only to get right back in line to see it again. That film, along with the movie Jaws, are even credited with starting the concept of the summer blockbuster that we still have today. And it's really no exaggeration to say that Star Wars, that first film, changed the very world. Something else Star Wars then helped popularize, and that is also a trend that persists today, though mind you, by no means was Star Wars the first one to do it, but it really started to popularize the idea of doing sequels. The idea of taking a successful movie and giving audiences more of it by giving them a whole other film, or maybe two more, or maybe even many, many more in some cases. And no surprise, after that aforementioned massive success of Star Wars, a sequel to it was indeed made, one that would come out 3 years later and was called The Empire Strikes Back. And even though I was a bit too young to remember how people reacted to that film when it was initially released, I'd wager there were some who were rather surprised by it, if not even shocked. I'd imagine some were even taken aback by just how different it was from that first Star Wars movie. I mean, that first film was a fun action-adventure that was, maybe a little campy and saw the good guys somehow win in the end despite the odds. While The Empire Strikes Back was, well, it wasn't those things. It was a more serious film, and the good guys weren't winning this time around. In fact, pretty much everything that could go wrong for our heroes did go wrong. It was also very different in tone, and certainly didn't have you feeling as upbeat after seeing it like that first movie did. And so I would have to imagine, though yes, plenty of people loved it from the moment they first saw it, probably even thought it was better than that first movie right away. But I'd imagine some said that it maybe was a bit too dark or gritty, or it was too grim and was missing the fun that that first film had, or maybe the pacing was off, it didn't feel enough like an adventure, and thus it wasn't really Star Wars. Which, sounds rather familiar to arguments being made by some about Andor these days, but we'll get more into that show in a bit. Anyway, all these years later, all these decades later, most now regard The Empire Strikes Back as not only quintessential Star Wars, but just the very best Star Wars movie or Star Wars anything ever made. Many see that film as the gold standard for the franchise, that which all other Star Wars will forever be measured against, and not the first film. Somehow Star Wars is not the best Star Wars movie, and that instead a movie that, again, you could certainly make a strong case is a heck of a lot different than it, is a better Star Wars movie. Somehow that first film, the one that changed the world, that captivated a generation, is not the one that most would say is the best. Which should already begin to tell us that what is Star Wars, or what makes something Star Wars, is not 100% rooted in being just like that first movie. That yes, of course, there was absolutely something special about that film, that it was an amazing movie, don't get me wrong, but actually the second movie, a very different movie from it, did Star Wars better than it did Star Wars. Heck, I'd even go so far as to say that the smartest decision those creating The Empire Strikes Back could have made, and did make, after just how beloved that first film was, how it was considered by many at the time to be the greatest, most epic film they could ever imagine seeing, the smartest thing they could do was to not try to duplicate that, to not try to make a bigger and better version of Star Wars, which is what oftentimes sequels try to do. They try to one-up what was done before in the first movie, and this has a tendency to fail, though it can also be very successful as well. But again, Star Wars was already the biggest movie of all time, at that time anyway, and I dare say most were expecting the new film to indeed try to outdo it, to be Star Wars but more, to be bigger and to be an even grander adventure than the first time. And instead, they got something different that was arguably better, while, yes, having some of those Star Wars elements in there from the first movie, and still being a big film. The Empire Strikes Back is a big movie. It is not a completely radical departure from that first film or anything, but it is certainly different enough from that first film to stand apart from it, though also just enough like it to stand alongside it and to be the same in enough respects and to very much be a proper sequel to the first movie, a continuation of the story and the characters. And all of that just might be the most impressive thing about that movie, that it balanced on that very, very fine line between the two, that it neither made the mistake of doing the same thing all over again, or doing something too different that was too much a departure from the original and that people didn't like because it didn't have any of that magic that the first one had. However, many, many years later, the Star Wars sequel trilogy managed to somehow make both mistakes in the same trilogy. The first film in it, The Force Awakens, tried way too hard to harken back to the original Star Wars movie, to be just like it. And though, yes, undeniably it was a smash box office success and was rather well received by most at the time, and certainly it still has its fans today, but many now look back and call it for what it is or what it was all along, something that George Lucas said about it from the very start, that being it wasn't anything new. And before going on, it is worth noting that George Lucas always insisted each Star Wars movie, be different than the previous ones, that no two felt exactly the same. Which, if you want to take stock in what the creator said about Star Wars, which I think we should, it means there is no one single magic formula to making it that should always be used. It should be, in at least some capacity, be different every single time. Now, yes, maybe some of the ingredients should be the same each time, but the end result, what it ultimately is, should be different from what's come before, which is again where The Force Awakens kind of failed. It really just wanted to be Star Wars all over again. It's not a beat-for-beat copy or anything, but there's enough in there that if someone told you this was just a remake of A New Hope, you would probably believe it. Then there was the next film in the sequel trilogy, The Last Jedi, which decided to go to the opposite extreme. Instead of trying too hard to be Star Wars, it decided to deconstruct Star Wars, to deconstruct the myth, to deconstruct the Jedi, and it used the character of Luke Skywalker to do all that. And though, yes, some do love that movie, some will say it is the best Star Wars since The Empire Strikes Back, and they are free to feel that way. Others will argue not only is it a bad movie, but it's also a terrible Star Wars movie, that this was the wrong time and place, with it being the second to last movie in the whole saga, to try and take the Jedi down a peg. Especially when the previous film had made it seem like, if anything, we were going to dive right into some really interesting lore about the Jedi, the Force, and all of that, considering Luke had, he'd sought out the first Jedi Temple for what had to be a greater purpose, to help him defeat this new evil, to help him stop Snoke. Maybe it was all even going to tie back into the prophecy of the Chosen One. There were a lot of theories and a lot of excitement about what Episode 8 was going to be, but we got none of that at all. Rian Johnson not only essentially ignored what J.J. Abrams had done in The Force Awakens, ignored the mystery box in favor of Subversion, but he tried very hard to make his own movie, to do his own thing entirely, instead of making a Star Wars movie. Instead of using some of those classic ingredients, he made a Rian Johnson movie and just seasoned it with Star Wars. Because yeah, there are some gorgeous visuals in there, there are lightsabers, and there are stormtroopers, and all of that sort of thing. All the things that a lot of people say is Star Wars. But honestly, I don't think what Star Wars is something simple or overt like that. Something you can just easily point to and say, there it is, that's what makes something Star Wars. Something like it has lots of lightsabers, or the Jedi or Sith are in it, and there are big space battles. Because if it were that simple, if those were the only ingredients needed, not a single person would ever try and argue that the prequels aren't Star Wars, and yet many do. There are plenty of people out there, mainly some of those who grew up with the original trilogy, that will call the prequels nothing short of an abomination, and that those films are not Star Wars, while others, those who mainly grew up with the films, love the prequels and think they are Star Wars at its finest. Some of them might even say that Revenge of the Sith is actually the best Star Wars movie of all time, and not Empire. Then there's something like The Acolyte. There are plenty of Jedi and lightsabers in there. Even has Darth Plagueis peeking out of a cave for a moment. So that should be Star Wars, right? That should make it Star Wars automatically because it has those things. Well, plenty of people out there would disagree with you on that one. There are some who would even go so far as to say or make a case that it is anti-Star Wars because of the themes or messages, that it seems to paint the Sith in a favorable or sympathetic light, as nothing more than victims of circumstances brought about by the Jedi, whose retaliatory actions are therefore justified, and that just doesn't seem like a message Star Wars should send. Which then brings us to the question of, is that what Star Wars is? Is it all about the themes or message? Is Star Wars supposed to say something or mean something, and is that something very specific? And that finally kind of brings us back to Andor, because there are plenty of themes and messages in there, some rather profound ones, you could say. That show has a lot to say, and I think what it says aligns very well with what Star Wars has said previously, especially when it comes to selflessness versus selfishness, and how choices made by individuals can have far-reaching consequences. For me, in my opinion, it's some of the best Star Wars ever, even if there's no lightsabers or Jedi, and even if it only very briefly brings in any sort of elements of the Force. And mind you, I love all those things. One of my favorite types of videos to make on this channel, as many of you know, is to discuss every aspect of the Force and how it all works and what it all means. I love all of that stuff. I love the Jedi, the Sith, and lightsabers and space battles. I love the kind of things that make Star Wars, in the opinion of many, feel like Star Wars. And so, honestly here, when it comes to what is Star Wars or what makes something Star Wars or not, I don't think there is a right answer. And I think that's a good thing, because I do agree with George Lucas that every piece of Star Wars should be different from the last. Those who make Star Wars should always be striving to do something new, while, yes, glancing back at the past and trying to harken back to what has worked before. You don't want to neglect what got you here in the first place. I do want some more classic feeling Star Wars stories, but I do also want Star Wars to surprise me from time to time and make something very unexpected. And yet, yeah, there are also lines I don't necessarily want to see them cross, or types of stories that I don't think would fit very well into Star Wars, though they might be things others want to see them do. Which is really the problem here, or what the conclusion is, that Star Wars is something different for everybody. What feels like Star Wars to me may not feel like Star Wars to you, though, yeah, there is probably a lot of overlap on what people would agree or disagree about when it comes to what is Star Wars. And yes, I know some will also make the case that what is Star Wars is whatever George Lucas made himself because he is the original creator and everything after has been a facsimile, or that what is Star Wars is now whatever Disney decides is Star Wars because they own it. Or some might argue the only thing Star Wars is the first Star Wars movie, that everything that has come after it has just been a replica in some way, shape, or form. But in reality, there can't be a right answer, or not one we're all going to agree upon, because we all discovered Star Wars at different times, at different places in our life. We started at different parts of it. Some may have seen the original trilogy first when they were very young. Others may have started with the prequels or the Clone Wars, while others, well, maybe Andor is their introduction to Star Wars. Or maybe it was the sequel trilogy that got them into it. And that's then what sort of sets the precedence for them going forward. That is what Star Wars is to them at its core. And I know, maybe this is a lame answer, or me trying to take an easy way out of a hard question, but it's the one I've actually come to believe, and I have changed my mind on this over the years. I probably a few years ago would have told you there is a strict set of things that make something Star Wars or not. But after doing this on YouTube for almost a decade now, I have talked to so many of my fellow fans. I have been given some incredible insights that I never would have seen otherwise. And I realized that, yes, Star Wars is just different things to different people. And who am I, or anyone really, to tell you why you should enjoy Star Wars, or why you're supposed to enjoy it, or what it actually is? And that isn't to say you can't ever criticize parts of it. I know I have before. I will again, almost certainly. But it's impossible to define what Star Wars is because, again, it means different things to different people. Though, yeah, as I said, there's a lot of overlap. I would even guess we probably agree a hell of a lot more than we disagree on what is Star Wars if we actually sat down and talked about it. But we maybe do have a bad habit in this fan base of arguing over small disagreements more than just trying to look at the bigger picture and look at how we agree that Star Wars is something that is special to all of us. We all love this franchise, even if we don't exactly agree on what it is. Well, that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what your definition of Star Wars is. What is it about this franchise you like, or maybe you liked once upon a time, and that makes it something you enjoy or enjoyed? Whatever the case may be, leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.